The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor as Rebecca Sterling stared at the hotel security footage on her phone. Crystal fragments scattered across the kitchen tiles like tiny diamonds, reflecting the overhead lights as her 17-year marriage crumbled in real time. The anonymous text had arrived 20 minutes ago. 3 simple words: check your email. The attached photos showed everything she needed to see and everything she never wanted to know. David Sterling, her husband of 17 years, entering the Meridian Hotel with a woman half his age. The timestamps showed they'd been there for 2 hours. Rebecca's hands trembled as she scrolled through additional images. David's hand on the small of the woman's back, their lips meeting in the hotel lobby, his wedding ring catching the light as he caressed her face. Each photo felt like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her stomach lurch. She recognized the woman immediately. Vanessa Cole, the new junior associate at David's law firm, 28 years old, long blonde hair, and the kind of figure that made Rebecca suddenly conscious of her own 40-year-old body. Rebecca had met her at the firm's Christmas party 6 months ago. Vanessa had been polite, professional, calling her Mrs. Sterling with a sweet smile that now felt like mockery. Rebecca sank into the kitchen chair where she'd eaten breakfast that morning with Tyler and Emma, discussing their weekend plans while David claimed he had to work late again. How many lies had she swallowed with her coffee? How many times had she kissed him goodbye while he planned his rendezvous with another woman? The house felt different now, tainted by deception. Every corner held memories that were now suspect. The vacation photos on the refrigerator, the anniversary card David had given her last month, the family portrait hanging in the hallway, all of it contaminated by his betrayal. Rebecca's phone buzzed. David's location on Find My Phone showed he was still at the hotel, still with her, still destroying everything they'd built together. She thought about their children sleeping upstairs. Tyler, 16 and preparing for college applications. Emma, 13 and navigating the complexities of middle school. How would she explain that their father was a liar and a cheater? How would she protect them from this devastation? Another memory surfaced, sharp and clear. The receipt she'd found in David's suit pocket last month. Expensive lingerie from Victoria's Secret. Size small. She wore size large. When she'd asked about it, David had laughed it off as a receipt that must have gotten mixed up with his when he was shopping for her birthday gift. She'd believed him because she wanted to believe him. The evidence had been there all along. The late nights that became more frequent. The new cologne she didn't recognize. The way he'd started taking his phone into the bathroom. The business trips that seemed to multiply. Rebecca had noticed but dismissed each red flag, choosing trust over suspicion, loyalty over doubt. But now the doubt crashed over her like a tsunami, washing away years of willful blindness. She remembered finding a strand of long blonde hair on his shirt collar. He'd claimed it must have come from a client. She remembered the credit card charge for an expensive restaurant on a night he'd said he was working late at the office. He'd explained it as a client dinner he'd forgotten to mention. Rebecca stood up, her legs unsteady. The woman who had kissed her husband goodbye that morning was gone. In her place stood someone harder, clearer, angrier, someone who would not be made a fool of any longer. She walked to the window and stared at their perfectly manicured lawn, the result of 17 years of shared dreams and compromises. The house they'd bought when she was pregnant with Tyler, the swing set they'd assembled together when Emma was 4, the rose garden she'd planted for their 10th anniversary, all of it built on lies. Rebecca's phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, along with his photo, the two of them on their last anniversary, smiling and holding hands. Her finger hovered over the answer button. She could confront him now, scream and cry and demand explanations. She could race to the hotel and make a scene. She could fall apart the way he probably expected her to. Instead, she declined the call. Rebecca Sterling had always been methodical, a trait that had made her successful in her marketing career. She approached problems systematically, gathering data before making decisions. This problem required the same approach, but the stakes were infinitely higher. She walked to David's home office, a room she rarely entered, respecting his need for privacy. Privacy that had hidden his betrayal. The computer was password protected, but Rebecca knew David well enough to guess. His mother's maiden name combined with Tyler's birth year. The screen unlocked immediately. The browser history told its own story. Hotel websites, restaurant reservations for two, jewelry stores, a pattern of deception stretching back months. Rebecca screenshotted everything, building a digital trail of evidence. Her marketing background had taught her the importance of documentation. Every successful campaign required proof of concept, measurable results, undeniable data. This would be no different. As she gathered evidence of her husband's affair, Rebecca felt something she hadn't expected. Beneath the devastation and betrayal was a growing sense of clarity. For months, she'd felt like she was losing her mind, sensing distance and dishonesty, but being told she was paranoid. Now she knew she'd been right all along. The truth, however painful, was liberating. Rebecca's phone buzzed again. Another text from David. "Stuck in meeting? Don't wait up." The casualness of his lie enraged her more than the affair itself. He was still lying, still treating her like a fool, even as she stared at photos of him with another woman. She typed back, "No problem. Sleep well." Two could play this game, but Rebecca intended to win. Rebecca drove through the empty streets at 11:30 p.m., her mind sharp despite the emotional devastation. She needed somewhere private to think, somewhere untainted by David's presence. Her office building was perfect, quiet, secure, and equipped with everything she needed to build her case. The parking garage was deserted as she made her way to the elevator. Sterling Marketing occupied the 7th floor, and Rebecca had her own corner office with a view of the city. She'd worked hard for that office, balancing career advancement with motherhood while David climbed his own professional ladder. Now she wondered how many late nights at the office were actually spent with Vanessa Cole. Rebecca settled at her desk and opened her laptop. If David wanted to play games with their marriage, she would approach this like any other project, with thorough research, strategic planning, and flawless execution. She started with their joint credit card accounts. The statements painted a devastating picture. The Meridian Hotel appeared frequently. Always on nights David claimed to be working late. Expensive dinners at romantic restaurants she'd never seen. Jewelry purchases from Tiffany's that had never made it home to her. A pattern of deception that stretched back 8 months. Rebecca printed everything, organizing the evidence chronologically. Her hands remained steady as she worked, fueled by a cold fury that burned cleaner than rage. David had always underestimated her analytical skills, treating her marketing career as somehow less important than his legal work. That condescension would be his downfall. The hotel charges alone told a story. Always the same suite, always charged to his personal card, never expensed as business. The frequency had increased dramatically over the past 3 months, sometimes twice a week. Rebecca cross-referenced the dates with David's calendar and found perfect correlation with his claimed late meetings and weekend work sessions. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from David. She ignored them all. Next, she examined their bank accounts. David managed their finances, claiming his legal background made him better suited for the task. Rebecca had trusted him completely, focusing on her career and their children while he handled investments, savings, and major purchases. That trust now felt like naive stupidity. What she found made her blood run cold. David had been systematically moving money from their joint accounts into a personal account she'd never known existed. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers disguised as investment adjustments or business expenses. Over the past 6 months, he'd moved nearly $50,000 without her knowledge or consent. Rebecca screenshotted every transaction, every suspicious transfer, every hotel charge. She organized the evidence into folders labeled by date and type of deception. Her marketing training served her well. She knew how to tell a compelling story with data, and David's story was one of calculated betrayal. At 12:45 a.m., she called Margaret Hayes. Margaret had been their family attorney for 12 years, handling their house purchase, their wills, and various legal matters. More importantly, she was Rebecca's friend, someone who had watched their marriage with knowing eyes and had always been available when Rebecca needed advice. "Rebecca," Margaret's voice was alert despite the late hour. "What's wrong? I need your help. Can you meet me somewhere private? It's about David." Margaret's sigh was audible through the phone. "I was wondering when this call would come. Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm at my office. Margaret, I have evidence. Lots of it. Don't say anything else over the phone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Margaret Hayes was 67 years old, silver-haired and sharp as a blade. She'd built her practice representing women in difficult situations, specializing in divorce cases where husbands thought they could outsmart their wives. She arrived at Rebecca's office carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression that could cut glass. "Show me everything," Margaret said without preamble. Rebecca spread the evidence across her conference table. Credit card statements, bank records, screenshots of hotel charges, photos from the anonymous email. Margaret examined each piece methodically, occasionally making notes in her precise handwriting. "This is good work, Rebecca. Better than most private investigators could do." Margaret's voice was professional but warm. "How long have you suspected?" "I think I've known for months but kept making excuses. The proof came tonight." Rebecca showed Margaret the hotel photos. "Someone sent these anonymously." Margaret studied the images with a practiced eye. "These are high quality, professional. Someone wanted to make sure you had undeniable evidence." "Who would do that?" "Could be anyone. A hotel employee who disapproved, a colleague who got tired of watching David make a fool of you. Maybe even the other woman's friend who developed a conscience." Margaret set down the photos. "The why doesn't matter. What matters is what we do with this information." Margaret pulled out her laptop and began typing. "I've seen this pattern before. Rebecca, David's not just having an affair. He's preparing to leave you. The money transfers, the systematic deception, the escalating frequency of meetings with his mistress. Men like David don't just stumble into affairs. They plan them." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. "You think he's been planning this for months? I think he's been planning this since before the affair started. The financial moves began 8 months ago, but the hotel charges only started 6 months ago. He was preparing his exit strategy before he even made his move." Rebecca felt sick. While she'd been planning Tyler's birthday party and worrying about Emma's science grades, David had been orchestrating the destruction of their family. "What do I do?" Rebecca asked. Margaret's smile was predatory. "We beat him at his own game. In family law, the person who moves first usually wins. David thinks he's being clever, but he's made crucial mistakes. The money transfers without your knowledge could constitute financial fraud. The systematic deception creates grounds for divorce that heavily favor you. And most importantly, he doesn't know that you know." Margaret began outlining their strategy. They would file for divorce immediately, seeking emergency orders to freeze all accounts and prevent David from moving more assets. The evidence Rebecca had gathered would support claims of financial misconduct and marital fraud. Margaret's assistant could have papers prepared and ready for service by morning. "This moves fast from here," Margaret warned. "Once we file, David will know everything. He'll hire his own attorney, probably someone aggressive who specializes in protecting cheating husbands." "Are you ready for that fight?" Rebecca thought about Tyler and Emma sleeping peacefully at home, unaware that their world was about to change forever. She thought about the years she'd spent supporting David's career, moving when his firm relocated, entertaining his clients, playing the perfect wife while he planned her betrayal. "I'm ready," she said. Margaret made several phone calls, mobilizing her team for an emergency filing. Her assistant would work through the night preparing documents. A process server was scheduled for dawn. Rebecca provided everything needed for the legal machinery to spring into action. "One more thing," Margaret said as they prepared to leave. "David will try to negotiate. He'll promise to end the affair, suggest counseling, claim it meant nothing. Don't believe him. Men who plan their exits this carefully don't change their minds when they get caught." Rebecca nodded, but Margaret wasn't finished. "He'll also try to turn this around on you. Claim you're being vindictive, that you're destroying the family over nothing, that you should think about the children. Remember, you didn't create this situation. You're just refusing to be a victim." As Margaret packed her briefcase, Rebecca realized she felt something unexpected. Beneath the devastation and anger was a growing sense of empowerment. For years, she'd felt like a supporting character in David's story. Tonight, she was taking control of her own narrative. "Thank you," Rebecca said. "Don't thank me yet," Margaret replied. "Thank me when you're free." Rebecca drove home through the quiet streets, her mind already shifting to the practical concerns of single motherhood. She would need to tell Tyler and Emma. She would need to handle their questions and their pain. She would need to rebuild their lives from the ashes of David's betrayal. But first, she needed to get through the next few hours. David's car was in the driveway when she arrived home. The house was dark except for a light in their bedroom. He was probably waiting up to explain his late night, ready with another lie to add to his collection. Rebecca parked in the garage and sat in her car for a moment, gathering her strength. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, conflict, and chaos. Tonight was her last night as David Sterling's wife. She intended to make it count. Rebecca entered the house at 2:15 a.m. to find David pacing the living room, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked up when she entered, relief flooding his face. "Never mind, she's here," he said into the phone, then hung up. "Jesus, Rebecca, where were you? I've been calling for hours." She studied her husband's face, the same face she'd loved for 20 years. Now a mask hiding deception? David Sterling at 42 was still handsome, his dark hair showing distinguished silver at the temples, his lawyer's suits tailored to his gym-maintained physique. Vanessa Cole was getting a prize, at least superficially. "I went for a drive. I needed to think." Rebecca kept her voice calm, almost casual. "Long day at work." David moved toward her, reaching for her hand. She let him take it, noting how easily he touched her after spending the evening with another woman. No guilt, no hesitation, no conscience. "You should have answered your phone. I was worried sick." The irony was staggering. David, worried about her whereabouts while he was betraying their marriage vows. Rebecca almost laughed at the absurdity. "I'm sorry. I had the phone on, silent." She squeezed his hand gently. "How was your meeting?" "Brutal. Davidson's case is more complicated than we expected. We'll probably be working late all week." The lies rolled off his tongue like water. David had always been a good attorney, comfortable with moral flexibility when it served his purposes. "That's too bad. Maybe things will calm down soon." They went through the motions of their bedtime routine with practiced efficiency. David showered while Rebecca changed into pajamas, both of them performing their roles in the charade of their marriage. She wondered if he thought about Vanessa while washing off her perfume. She wondered if he compared them, judging her aging body against his young mistress's firm curves. In bed, David reached for her. Rebecca forced herself not to recoil as he kissed her neck, his hands moving over her body with the casual entitlement of ownership. She thought about where those hands had been a few hours earlier and felt nauseated. "I'm tired," she whispered, turning away. David sighed but didn't press. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep. Rebecca lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her marriage dying. At 4 a.m., unable to sleep, she slipped out of bed and went downstairs. The house was quiet, filled with 17 years of shared memories that now felt like evidence of her own gullibility. Photo albums filled with family vacations, where David had probably been mentally absent, planning his escape. Wedding pictures that now looked like documentation of her naive trust. Rebecca made coffee and sat at the kitchen table where the champagne glass had shattered 8 hours earlier. She'd cleaned up the mess, but tiny fragments remained in the grout between the tiles, sparkling reminders of the moment her world changed. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "Papers ready. Service scheduled for 6:30 a.m. Are you prepared?" Rebecca typed back. "Ready?" She went upstairs and quietly gathered important documents from David's office. Their marriage certificate, birth certificates for the children, insurance policies, mortgage documents. Everything Margaret had said they would need. David slept through her movements, exhausted from his night of deception. At 5:30, Rebecca dressed carefully in a navy business suit that made her feel professional and powerful. She applied makeup with precision, armoring herself for the battle ahead. In the mirror, she saw a woman who looked calm and in control. Good. David would not see her fall apart. The locksmith arrived at 6 a.m. sharp. Rebecca met him at the side door, explaining that her husband was a heavy sleeper and she didn't want to wake him. The man was professional and efficient, changing all the locks within 20 minutes. Rebecca now had the only set of keys. At 6:15, Tyler wandered into the kitchen looking for breakfast. At 16, her son was already taller than David, with Rebecca's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. He was a good kid, serious about his studies and planning to study engineering in college. "You're up early," he said, rummaging through the refrigerator. Couldn't sleep. Want some eggs? They went through the familiar morning routine, but Rebecca was acutely aware that this might be their last normal breakfast for a long time. Tyler chatted about his upcoming soccer tournament, unaware that his father's actions were about to turn their family upside down. "Is Dad working late again tonight?" Tyler asked. The question pierced Rebecca's heart. Even their children had noticed David's absences, accepted his lies as normal. She forced her voice to stay steady. "I'm not sure what Dad's schedule is today." At 6:25, Emma shuffled into the kitchen in her pajamas, her dark hair messy from sleep. At 13, Rebecca's daughter was caught between childhood and adolescence, still willing to cuddle but increasingly independent. She was the social one in the family, always surrounded by friends, always planning events. "Why is everyone up so early?" Emma grumbled, pouring cereal into a bowl. "Just an early morning," Rebecca said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. Both children were still eating when the doorbell rang at exactly 6:30 a.m. Rebecca walked to the front door, her heart pounding despite her outward calm. Through the peephole, she could see a woman in a professional blazer holding a manila envelope. The process server Margaret had arranged. "Can I help you?" Rebecca asked through the closed door. "I'm looking for David Sterling. I have documents that need to be served personally." Rebecca opened the door, noting that the woman was professional but determined. This wasn't her first hostile delivery. "He's upstairs, I'll get him." Rebecca climbed the stairs with measured steps, her mind surprisingly clear. This was it, the moment when her marriage officially died and her new life began. She found David in their bathroom, shaving and humming under his breath. He looked relaxed, probably planning his next rendezvous with Vanessa. "David, someone's here to see you." He looked confused but followed her downstairs, still wearing his pajamas and carrying his coffee mug. Tyler and Emma looked up from their breakfast with mild curiosity. Rebecca positioned herself in the kitchen doorway, wanting to witness the moment when David's carefully constructed lies collapsed. The process server was waiting in the foyer, papers in hand. "David Sterling." "Yes, you've been served." David accepted the manila envelope with the bewildered expression of someone still half asleep. Rebecca watched his face as he tore open the envelope and began reading the divorce papers Margaret had prepared. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to dawning horror. The color drained from his face as he scanned the comprehensive evidence Margaret had compiled. Every hotel charge, every suspicious bank transfer, every lie he'd told was documented with devastating precision. "Rebecca," his voice was barely a whisper. "What is this?" "I know about Vanessa," Rebecca said calmly, aware that Tyler and Emma had stopped eating and were watching the scene unfold. "I know about the money you've been hiding. I know everything." David's lawyer training kicked in as he continued reading, his face hardening as he realized how thoroughly Margaret had prepared their case. When he finally looked up, his eyes were cold and calculating. "We need to talk, privately." "I think we're past private conversations," Rebecca replied. David looked at their children, clearly realizing for the first time that they were witnessing his exposure. Tyler was staring at his father with dawning understanding, while Emma looked confused and frightened. "Kids, go upstairs, now." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "They're old enough to know their father made choices that are going to change our family." Tyler stood up slowly, his breakfast forgotten. "Dad, what's going on?" David looked trapped, cornered by his own actions and Rebecca's strategic precision. He tried to muster his courtroom presence, but 17 years of marriage had given Rebecca insight into his weaknesses. "This is a misunderstanding that your mother and I need to work out." "It's not a misunderstanding," Rebecca said. "Your father has been having an affair for months. He's been lying to all of us and stealing money from our family accounts." Emma started crying. Tyler's face went white with shock and anger. David looked between his children and his wife, probably realizing that his reputation as a father was crumbling along with his marriage. "Rebecca, please, think about what you're doing to our family." The audacity was breathtaking. David, who had systematically betrayed his family for months, was now claiming that Rebecca was the one causing damage. "I didn't do this to our family." "David, you did." Margaret had warned her that David would try to manipulate the situation, painting himself as the victim and her as the aggressor. But Rebecca was prepared for his tactics. David tried to step toward her, but she moved back, maintaining distance. We can fix this. It doesn't have to end like this. Yes, it does, Rebecca said quietly. You've been planning to leave us for months. The only difference is now you don't get to do it on your terms. She could see David's mind racing, probably calculating his legal options and realizing how thoroughly Margaret had outmaneuvered him. I need to call my attorney, he said finally. Good idea. You're going to need one. As David stomped upstairs to make his calls, Rebecca turned her attention to Tyler and Emma. They looked shell-shocked, caught between childhood and the harsh realities of adult betrayal. Are you getting divorced? Emma asked through her tears. Yes, sweetheart. I am. Is Dad really cheating? Tyler's voice cracked with emotion. Rebecca knelt down and pulled both children into a hug, drawing strength from their warmth and trust. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but yes, your father has been unfaithful to our marriage. He's made choices that mean we can't stay married anymore. Emma sobbed against her shoulder while Tyler stood rigid with anger. Rebecca held them close, knowing that their pain was just beginning, but that they were strong enough to survive it. From upstairs came the sound of David's voice, urgent and desperate as he tried to reach his attorney. Rebecca felt no satisfaction in his panic, only a cold determination to protect her children from any more of his damage. The battle was just beginning, but Rebecca had already won the most important victory. She was no longer David's victim. She was his opponent, and she intended to defeat him completely. David's phone calls grew increasingly agitated throughout the morning. Rebecca could hear him pacing in their bedroom, his voice tight with barely controlled panic as he tried to reach his attorney. Then his business partner, Frank Porter. Then apparently anyone who might help him navigate the disaster his life had become. Rebecca maintained her calm facade while inside she felt like she was watching someone else's life unfold. She made lunch for Tyler and Emma, helped Emma with her algebra homework, discussed Tyler's upcoming college applications. The domestic routine felt surreal against the backdrop of their disintegrating family. Emma cried intermittently throughout the day. Asking questions, Rebecca answered as honestly as she could. Tyler retreated into sullen anger, shooting dark looks toward the stairs when David's voice carried down. Both children were processing the revelation that their father was not who they thought he was. Mom, are we going to have to move? Emma asked during lunch. No, sweetheart. This is our home. We're staying here. What about Dad? Rebecca glanced toward the stairs where David's voice had risen in what sounded like argument with his attorney. Your father will have to find somewhere else to live. Tyler looked up from his sandwich. Good. I don't want him here anyway. The bitterness in her son's voice broke Rebecca's heart. David's selfish choices weren't just destroying their marriage, they were poisoning his relationship with his children. At 2 p.m., David finally emerged from the bedroom. He'd showered and dressed in one of his expensive suits, probably trying to reclaim some authority through his professional appearance. His face was haggard but determined. Rebecca, we need to talk. We have nothing to discuss that can't be handled through our attorneys. Please, give me 5 minutes, for the sake of 17 years. Rebecca looked at Tyler and Emma, both watching the interaction with wary eyes. She didn't want to subject them to whatever manipulation David was planning. Kids, why don't you go watch TV in the family room? They reluctantly left, though Rebecca suspected they would try to eavesdrop. She remained in the kitchen, maintaining physical distance from David. This is insane, Rebecca. You're destroying our family over a mistake. A mistake that lasted 8 months and cost us $50,000. David flinched. Margaret's financial documentation had clearly been thorough. It's not what you think. Vanessa, it just happened. I never meant for it to go this far. The lies continued even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Rebecca almost admired his persistence. Which time just happened? David. The first hotel meeting, the 10th. When you bought her jewelry with our money, when you set up the separate bank account. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing, but now saw as calculated vulnerability. I know how it looks, but I can explain everything. The money transfers were investments. I was trying to diversify our portfolio into hotel rooms and expensive dinners. I made mistakes. Rebecca, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll end things with Vanessa immediately, Sachten. Rebecca studied her husband's face, searching for any trace of genuine remorse. She found only desperation and calculation. David wasn't sorry he'd betrayed her. He was sorry he'd been caught. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "I don't want to fix this. I want it to end." David's mask slipped, revealing the anger beneath his pleading exterior. "You're being ridiculous. Marriage isn't perfect. People make mistakes. You can't just throw away 17 years because of one indiscretion." "One indiscretion, David. You've been systematically lying to me for months. You've been stealing from our joint accounts. You've been having an affair with a woman young enough to be our daughter. This isn't a mistake. It's a pattern of calculated betrayal. You're overreacting. Vanessa means nothing to me." The casual dismissal of his mistress revealed more about David's character than anything else he could have said. Vanessa might be young and naive, but she was still a human being. David's willingness to use and discard her showed the same callousness he'd shown toward his own family. "Does Vanessa know she means nothing to you?" David looked trapped. "That's not... Look, I'll handle Vanessa. The important thing is our family. You should have thought about our family before you started your affair." David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and Rebecca saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, panic, or maybe just frustration at being interrupted during his attempt at damage control. "Who is it?" "David. My attorney. I need to take this." He answered the phone, turning away from her. Rebecca could only hear fragments of his conversation, but his body language told the story. Slumped shoulders, rubbing his forehead, occasional sharp intakes of breath. Whatever his lawyer was telling him, it wasn't good news. When he hung up, David looked older somehow, defeated. "My attorney says Margaret Hayes is known for being aggressive in divorce cases. She's expensive and she doesn't mess around." "Good. That's exactly what I wanted to hear." David stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You've really thought this through, haven't you? This isn't a spontaneous reaction. You've been planning this." "I've been planning this for exactly 12 hours, which is 12 hours longer than you deserved." "Rebecca, please, think about Tyler and Emma. Think about what this will do to them." The manipulation was textbook. Make her feel guilty for protecting herself and their children from his destructive choices. Margaret had warned her about this tactic. "I am thinking about Tyler and Emma. I'm thinking about what it would teach them if I stayed married to a man who lies and cheats and steals. I'm thinking about what kind of example I want to set about self-respect and personal dignity." David tried a different approach. "What about our financial security? Divorce is expensive. Legal fees, maintaining two households, splitting assets. We'll both be worse off. Maybe, but at least I'll be honest." David's phone rang again. This time he ignored it, but it kept ringing. Finally, he looked at the screen and his face went white. "You need to answer it," Rebecca said. "It might be important." David declined the call, but it started ringing again immediately. Rebecca could see his hands shaking slightly as he declined it again. "Who keeps calling you?" "David, nobody. It's not important." But the phone rang a third time, and this time the caller ID was visible to Rebecca. She saw the name clearly, Vanessa Cole. The audacity was staggering. David's mistress was calling him at home while he was trying to reconcile with his wife. Either Vanessa was incredibly naive or completely shameless. "Answer it," Rebecca said. "No, answer it, or I will." David looked at her with something approaching fear. The control he'd maintained for months was slipping away, and he knew it. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Rebecca reached for the phone. David tried to pull it back, and for a moment they struggled over it, like children fighting over a toy. Finally, Rebecca yanked it free and swiped to answer. David Sterling's phone. Rebecca speaking. The silence on the other end was profound. Then, a young woman's voice, shaky and uncertain. I'm sorry. I was looking for David. He's right here, but he's busy destroying his family. Can I take a message?" Rebecca heard Vanessa's sharp intake of breath. Then the line went dead. David stared at her with a mixture of horror and admiration. "Jesus Christ, Rebecca. I just told your mistress the truth." David slumped against the kitchen counter, finally seeming to grasp that his carefully managed double life was over. No more lies, no more secret phone calls, no more pretending he was a faithful husband while planning his escape. What happens now? He asked. Rebecca looked at the man she'd loved for 20 years, the father of her children, the person she'd trusted with her heart and her future. She felt nothing but pity for him. Now you pack your things and leave. Margaret will handle the rest. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, David. Maybe Vanessa has room for you. As if summoned by her name, David's phone started ringing again. Vanessa Cole, probably confused and hurt by Rebecca's revelation, wanting explanations David couldn't give. This time, he answered. Hello. Rebecca could hear Vanessa's voice through the phone, high-pitched and emotional. David walked toward the sliding glass door, seeking privacy for a conversation that no longer deserved secrecy. Rebecca watched him through the window, gesturing with his free hand as he tried to manage yet another crisis his deception had created. She felt no jealousy, no curiosity about what he was telling his young mistress. That part of her life was over. Tyler appeared in the doorway. Mom, is Dad leaving? Yes, sweetheart. He's leaving. Tyler nodded, his face grave beyond his 16 years. Good, he said quietly. We're better without him. Rebecca pulled her son into a hug, drawing strength from his fierce loyalty. Tyler was right. They would be better without David's lies, David's manipulation, David's casual cruelty disguised as love. When David finally finished his phone call and came back inside, his face was grim. Vanessa wants to talk to you, he said. I have nothing to say to her. She's crying. She says she didn't know you knew. She says she's sorry. Rebecca almost laughed at the absurdity. David's mistress wanted to apologize for sleeping with her husband. The moral confusion was staggering. Tell Vanessa I said she can have you. She's going to need all the luck she can get. David looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Rebecca's expression stopped him. Maybe he finally understood that his powers of persuasion had limits. Maybe he finally realized that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven with smooth words and empty promises. I'll pack a bag, he said finally. As David went upstairs to gather his belongings, Rebecca felt the first stirring of something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. No more lies. No more wondering where her husband really was. No more pretending their marriage was healthy when it was slowly poisoning her soul. David Sterling had made his choices. Now Rebecca would make hers. And unlike David, she intended to choose wisely. David came downstairs 30 minutes later carrying 2 suitcases and a garment bag. He'd changed from his expensive suit into jeans and a polo shirt, looking more like the man Rebecca had married 20 years ago. For a moment, she felt a flicker of the old tenderness, quickly suppressed by the memory of his betrayal. Emma had stationed herself at the top of the stairs, watching her father's departure with red-rimmed eyes. Tyler stood in the living room doorway, his arms crossed, making no effort to help or say goodbye. This isn't how I wanted things to end, David said, setting his bags by the front door. How did you want them to end? Rebecca asked. David looked uncomfortable, probably realizing that any honest answer would reveal the depth of his deception. He'd obviously planned to leave eventually, probably after ensuring his financial escape route, and perhaps after Vanessa was willing to make their relationship public. I never meant to hurt you, or the kids, and yet here we are. David approached Tyler first, attempting a gesture of paternal authority that rang hollow. Son, I know this is hard to understand, but I love you and Emma more than anything. This situation with your mother, it's complicated. Tyler's voice was ice cold. It seems pretty simple to me. You cheated on Mom and lied to us. It's not that black and white. Yeah, it is. David tried to reach for Tyler's shoulder, but the teenager stepped back, rejecting physical comfort from the man who'd shattered his family's stability. I'll call you tonight. We can talk when things calm down. Don't bother, Tyler said, turning his back on his father. David looked stricken, probably beginning to understand that his children's love and respect couldn't be recovered with explanations and excuses. His betrayal of their mother had betrayed them as well. Emma was crying again as David climbed the stairs to say goodbye. Rebecca heard muffled conversation, David's voice pleading and Emma's tearful responses. Whatever promises he was making, Rebecca hoped Emma was smart enough not to believe them. When David returned downstairs, his eyes were red-rimmed, Emma followed him, throwing her arms around his waist in a desperate hug. I love you, Daddy. I love you too. Baby, this isn't forever. I'm going to fix this. Rebecca didn't contradict him in front of Emma, but she knew better. David couldn't fix what he'd deliberately broken. Some betrayals were permanent. David picked up his bags and looked at Rebecca one last time. I'll send movers for the rest of my things. Fine. Call first. He hesitated at the door, probably searching for words that might salvage something from the wreckage of their marriage. But there was nothing left to salvage. Rebecca, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. She studied his face, looking for genuine remorse. What she saw was regret, not for betraying her, but for being caught. Not for the pain he'd caused, but for the consequences he now faced. No, you're not, she said quietly. You're sorry you got caught. David opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Maybe he finally understood that his words had lost all credibility. He left without further ceremony, loading his bags into his BMW and driving away from the home they'd shared for 12 years. Rebecca watched from the window until his taillights disappeared, then locked the door behind him. Emma collapsed onto the couch, sobbing with the dramatic intensity only a 13-year-old could achieve. Tyler sat beside her, awkwardly patting her shoulder while struggling with his own emotions. Rebecca joined them on the couch, pulling both children close. They sat in silence for a long time, processing the reality that David was gone and wouldn't be coming back as the father they'd known and trusted. What happens now? Emma asked eventually. Now we figure out how to be a family of 3? Rebecca said. It won't be easy, but we'll be okay. Tyler's phone buzzed. He looked at it and frowned. Dad's texting me. He wants to explain everything. You don't have to respond if you're not ready, Rebecca said. Tyler deleted the message without reading it completely. I'm not ready. The afternoon passed quietly. Rebecca ordered pizza for dinner, and they ate while watching a mindless comedy movie. Normal activities that felt strange and fragile, like they were all pretending everything was fine when nothing was fine. At 8 p.m., David's BMW pulled back into the driveway. Rebecca looked out the window and sighed. She'd hoped for at least one night of peace before David's attempts to manipulate the situation continued. The doorbell rang. Rebecca opened it to find David standing on the porch, looking determined and desperate. We need to talk, he said. I told you everything goes through our attorneys now. Vanessa broke up with me. The statement was so unexpected that Rebecca almost laughed. David's great romance, the relationship that had destroyed their family, had lasted exactly 6 hours after being exposed. I'm sorry to hear that, Rebecca said, not meaning it at all. She said she can't be with a man who would lie to his wife and children the way I lied to you. She said she never would have gotten involved if she'd known how far it had gone. Rebecca wondered if Vanessa was genuinely naive or simply smarter than David had realized. Either way, the young woman had shown more moral clarity than David ever had. What do you want me to say? David, I want you to understand that it's over. Completely. She won't even take my calls. Good for her. David's face crumpled. I've lost everything. My marriage, my children, the woman I thought I loved. Everything. Yes, you have. Can't we try to work this out? I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes. Rebecca looked at her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, and felt nothing but tired pity. David was only interested in reconciliation now that his alternative had evaporated. If Vanessa had welcomed him with open arms, Rebecca doubted he'd be standing on her porch begging for forgiveness. It's too late, David. It's never too late. We have history. We have children together. We have children who watched you destroy their sense of security. We have a history you've completely invalidated with months of systematic deception. There's nothing left to work with. David tried to push past her into the house, but Rebecca blocked his path. This is my home too, he said. Not anymore. The locks have been changed. David's face showed genuine shock. You changed the locks. This morning, after the papers were served. For the first time, David seemed to understand the finality of Rebecca's decisions. She wasn't angry or emotional or acting impulsively. She was methodically dismantling their life together with the same efficiency she brought to her marketing campaigns. Where am I supposed to stay? That's not my problem. David stared at her, probably searching for some trace of the woman who had loved him unconditionally for 17 years. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder and smarter and far less trusting. "You've changed," he said. "Yes, I have. You made sure of that." David's phone rang. He looked at it hopefully, probably thinking Vanessa had reconsidered. His face fell when he saw a different name. "It's my attorney," he said, answering the call. Rebecca listened to David's side of the conversation with professional interest. His lawyer was clearly not optimistic about his position. Words like comprehensive evidence and financial misconduct and strongly advised settlement filtered through David's responses. When he hung up, David looked defeated. "Margaret Hayes has a reputation for being ruthless in divorce cases. My attorney says she's probably going to ask for everything. She won't have to ask. I'm giving her permission to take everything you've hidden from me and more." David's face went pale. "Rebecca, please, think about this rationally. If you destroy me financially, you're destroying the children's security too." "I'm thinking very rationally. I'm thinking about Tyler's college tuition that you've been gambling with your affair. I'm thinking about Emma's future that you've jeopardized with your financial deception. I'm thinking about my own retirement that you've compromised with your selfish choices." David tried one more approach. "What if I make it worth your while to settle quietly? I could give you the house, full custody, generous alimony. You're going to give me those things anyway. The difference is whether you do it voluntarily or whether Margaret forces you." David finally understood that he had no leverage, no bargaining power, nothing to offer that Rebecca couldn't take through legal proceedings. "I never thought you had it in you to be this cold. I never thought you had it in you to be this cruel. I guess we both learned something new about each other." David's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it and his face darkened. "Frank says there are rumors at the firm about my personal life affecting my professional reputation. Apparently word is getting around about the divorce." Rebecca felt no sympathy for David's professional embarrassment. He'd created his own problems through his own choices. "Maybe you should have considered that before you started sleeping with your colleague." David's anger finally erupted. "This is ridiculous. I made a mistake. Rebecca, one mistake, and you're going to destroy everything we built together over it." "One mistake, David. You've made dozens of mistakes over the past 8 months. Every lie you told was a choice. Every hotel room you booked was a choice. Every dollar you stole from our accounts was a choice. You made hundreds of choices that led us here." David looked around desperately, as if the solution to his problems might be hiding in the familiar landscape of their suburban neighborhood. "I can't afford to maintain 2 households on my salary. The mortgage payments alone will bankrupt me." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to have an affair." David tried one last manipulation. "What about the children? Do you really want them to see their father living in some crappy apartment because their mother took everything?" Rebecca looked at this man she'd once loved, this father of her children, this person she'd trusted with her heart and her future. She saw weakness disguised as charm, selfishness disguised as love, manipulation disguised as concern. "I want them to see that actions have consequences. I want them to understand that when you betray people who love you, there's a price to pay. I want them to learn that self-respect is more important than keeping peace at any cost." David finally seemed to understand that 17 years of marriage had ended completely. Rebecca wasn't angry or vindictive. She was simply done. "I'll fight this," he said quietly. "Good luck with that." David walked back to his car, defeated and alone. Rebecca watched him drive away again, this time with the satisfaction of knowing he wouldn't be coming back. Tyler appeared at her shoulder. "How do you feel?" "Mom," Rebecca considered the question seriously. How did she feel sad for the waste of 17 years? Angry at David's deception? Worried about Tyler and Emma's adjustment? But underneath all of that, she felt something unexpected. Relief. "I feel free," she said. Tyler nodded approvingly. "Good. Dad made his choice. Now we get to make ours." Rebecca smiled at her son's wisdom. Tyler was right. David had made his choice when he decided to betray their family. Now Rebecca and the children got to choose how to rebuild their lives without him. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest. After months of living with David's lies, honesty felt like a luxury Rebecca was ready to embrace. The next morning brought a parade of visitors that made Rebecca realize how public David's betrayal had become. News traveled fast in their suburban neighborhood, where 17-year marriages didn't dissolve overnight without generating intense curiosity. Jenny Walsh arrived first, carrying coffee and pastries from the local bakery. Rebecca's best friend and next-door neighbor had been suspicious of David for months, and her face showed a mixture of sympathy and vindication. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner," Jenny said, settling at Rebecca's kitchen table. "I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to be the one to plant seeds of doubt if I was wrong." "What did you see?" Rebecca asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "David and a young blonde woman at the farmer's market 3 weekends ago. They were holding hands, acting very couple-ish. When I called his name, he pretended not to hear me. The casualness of it stung. David hadn't just been sneaking around in secret. He'd been flaunting his affair in public, counting on Rebecca's trust to protect him from discovery. I also saw his car at the Meridian Hotel several times when I was driving home from my yoga class." Jenny continued, "I wondered what client meetings required hotel conference rooms on Saturday afternoons." Rebecca poured herself more coffee, processing the extent of David's deception. How many people had seen evidence of his affair? How many had wondered why Rebecca Sterling was the only person who didn't know her husband was cheating? Tyler came downstairs looking haggard. He'd spent the night texting with friends, dealing with questions about his parents' sudden separation. Word had already reached his high school through the efficient gossip network that connected teenage social circles. "Mom, everyone's asking what happened. What should I tell them?" Rebecca considered her response carefully. Tyler deserved guidance on handling the situation with dignity, but she also wanted to protect his privacy. "Tell them it's a private family matter and you'd prefer not to discuss it. If anyone pushes for details, you can say your parents are getting divorced and leave it at that." Jenny nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right. Don't let people turn your family's business into entertainment." Emma wandered into the kitchen still in her pajamas, her face puffy from crying. The previous day's revelations had hit her harder than Tyler, probably because she was younger and had idealized her father more completely. "Do I have to go to school today?" Emma asked. "Do you feel up to it?" "Not really. I don't want people asking questions." Rebecca decided both children could stay home. They needed time to process the changes without the added pressure of public scrutiny. Jenny stayed for an hour, providing emotional support and practical advice. She'd been through her own divorce 5 years earlier and understood the challenges Rebecca was facing. "The first few weeks are the hardest," Jenny said as she prepared to leave. "Everyone will have opinions about what you should do. Remember that you're the only one who knows what's best for you and your children." At 10 a.m., Margaret Hayes called with updates on the legal proceedings. "David hired Robert Brennan to represent him," Margaret reported. "He's competent but not particularly aggressive. I think David's hoping to settle quickly rather than drag this out." "What does that mean for us?" "It means he's probably realized his position is weak. Brennan specializes in damage control for wealthy men who've made poor choices. His strategy will be to minimize David's losses rather than fight for favorable terms." Rebecca felt a surge of satisfaction. David's systematic planning had backfired spectacularly. Instead of positioning himself for a favorable exit from their marriage, he'd created evidence of financial misconduct that strengthened Rebecca's position considerably. "How long will this take?" Rebecca asked. "If David's smart, he'll accept our terms within a few weeks. If he's stubborn, we could be in court for months. Either way, you're going to come out of this in good shape financially." Margaret's confidence was reassuring, but Rebecca knew the emotional toll would be significant regardless of the financial outcome. Tyler and Emma would need time to adjust, and Rebecca herself was still processing the destruction of her 20-year relationship. At noon, Carol Bennett arrived. Rebecca's mother was a petite woman in her late 50s, tougher than she looked and fiercely protective of her daughter. She'd never particularly liked David, claiming he was too charming and too concerned with appearances. "I always knew that man was no good," Carol declared, unpacking groceries she'd brought for the children. "Too smooth by half. Men who work that hard to be charming are usually hiding something." "Mom, please. The kids are already dealing with enough." "I'm just saying, honey, a mother knows these things. I tried to tell you 20 years ago that David Sterling cared more about David Sterling than anyone else, but you were too in love to listen." Rebecca didn't want to rehash old arguments, especially since her mother had been proven right. Carol's disapproval of David had been a source of tension throughout their marriage, but now it felt validating. Emma brightened considerably when her grandmother arrived. Carol had a gift for making everything seem manageable, approaching crisis with practical solutions and unconditional love. "Grandma, are you disappointed in Daddy?" Emma asked while Carol made her famous grilled cheese sandwiches. "I'm disappointed that your father made choices that hurt people he should protect, but I'm proud of your mother for refusing to accept treatment she doesn't deserve." Carol's straightforward response seemed to help Emma process the situation. Children needed clear moral guidance, especially when their world had been turned upside down by adult failures. The afternoon brought more visitors. Sarah Chen from across the street stopped by with a casserole and news that several other neighborhood wives had suspected David's affair. The book club Rebecca belonged to had apparently discussed David's frequent absences and mysterious behavior for weeks. "We didn't want to gossip," Sarah explained, "but some of the women noticed changes in his routine. The new clothes, the different cologne, the way he started taking calls outside during our barbecues." Rebecca felt embarrassed that her friends had seen signs she'd missed, but also grateful for their discretion. They'd protected her from rumors while she remained oblivious to her husband's betrayal. At 3 p.m., Frank Porter called. David's business partner sounded uncomfortable, but determined to clear the air. "Rebecca, I want you to know that I had no idea how serious David's situation had become. I knew he was having personal problems, but I didn't realize the extent of his deception." "What did you know?" "Frank, I knew about Vanessa. I warned David months ago that workplace relationships were dangerous, especially with someone so much younger. I told him it could destroy his marriage and his career." Rebecca appreciated Frank's honesty, though it highlighted how many people had known about David's affair while she remained in the dark. "Is this going to affect the firm?" Rebecca asked. Frank hesitated. "David's reputation has definitely taken a hit. Clients don't like personal drama affecting their legal representation. We're reviewing his caseload to make sure nothing important gets dropped during his personal crisis." The professional consequences were beginning to mount. David's carefully constructed image as a successful attorney and devoted family man was crumbling, replaced by the reality of his poor judgment and moral flexibility. Tyler's phone buzzed constantly throughout the afternoon as friends reached out with support and curiosity. Rebecca was proud of how maturely he handled the attention, neither hiding from the situation nor providing unnecessary details. "Jake's parents are getting divorced too," Tyler reported after one call. "He says it's actually better now because they stopped fighting all the time." Rebecca hoped Tyler was right. The constant tension of the past few months, the sense that something was wrong without knowing what, had created an unhealthy atmosphere in their home. Maybe honesty, however painful, would be an improvement. At 5 p.m., David's phone number appeared on Rebecca's caller ID. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. "Rebecca, I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need you to know that I'm getting help. I've scheduled appointments with a counselor to figure out why I made such terrible choices. I'm also looking into financial counseling to straighten out the money issues. I want to be a better person for you and the kids." Rebecca deleted the message without feeling moved by David's promises. He'd had 17 years to be a better person. His sudden interest in self-improvement seemed motivated more by consequences than genuine remorse. Emma overheard the voicemail and looked hopeful. "Maybe Daddy really will change." Rebecca chose her words carefully. "People can change, sweetheart, but only if they want to change for themselves, not because they got caught doing something wrong. Right now, your father is probably more interested in avoiding consequences than becoming a better person." Tyler nodded wisely. He's only sorry because he got busted. As evening approached, Rebecca realized she felt lighter than she had in months. The house was full of people who genuinely cared about her and the children. The phone kept ringing with offers of support. Even her mother's presence, usually stressful, felt comforting. David's betrayal had revealed the strength of Rebecca's support network. Friends, family, neighbors, even professional colleagues were rallying around her. She wasn't facing this crisis alone. At bedtime, Emma crawled into Rebecca's lap while she read stories. The physical comfort was healing for both of them, rebuilding the sense of security that David's departure had shaken. "Mom, are you scared?" Emma asked. "A little, Rebecca admitted. Big changes are always scary, but I'm not worried about whether we'll be okay. I know we will be. Tyler appeared in the doorway, looking younger than his 16 years in his pajamas. Can I sleep in here tonight? He asked. On the floor or something. Rebecca's heart broke for her children, who were seeking comfort and security in the wake of their father's abandonment. She moved over in the king-size bed that suddenly felt too large. You can both sleep here tonight. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow. As Tyler and Emma settled beside her, Rebecca felt a profound sense of peace. David's betrayal had destroyed their family as they'd known it, but it hadn't destroyed their capacity for love, support, and resilience. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more legal complications, more difficult conversations. But tonight, Rebecca Sterling was surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. In the wreckage of her marriage, that felt like everything. She'd lost a husband, but she'd kept her dignity. She'd lost her illusions, but she'd found her strength. Most importantly, she'd shown Tyler and Emma that love didn't mean accepting treatment that diminished your worth. As her children fell asleep beside her, Rebecca stared at the ceiling and planned for the future. A future without David's lies, David's manipulation, David's casual cruelty disguised as love. For the first time in months, that future looked bright. The morning brought another surprise visitor. Dr. Patricia Weinstein, Emma's school counselor, arrived with coffee and a concerned expression. Rebecca invited her in, curious about what had prompted the early visit. Emma's teachers are aware of the situation at home, Dr. Weinstein explained gently. We wanted to offer support and let you know about resources available for children dealing with family transitions. Rebecca appreciated the school's proactive approach. Emma would need extra support as she processed her parents' divorce and adjusted to their new family structure. How much do the teachers know? Rebecca asked. Only that there has been a significant change in Emma's home life. We don't discuss specifics, but we watch for signs that children need additional emotional support. Dr. Weinstein provided pamphlets about counseling services and support groups for children of divorce. She also offered to arrange meetings with Emma's teachers to ensure they understood her current emotional state. The most important thing is maintaining stability in other areas of Emma's life while she adjusts to changes at home. Dr. Weinstein advised, consistent routines, clear expectations, and plenty of reassurance about what isn't changing. After Dr. Weinstein left, Rebecca felt grateful for the professional support system surrounding her family. The divorce might be traumatic, but Tyler and Emma wouldn't have to navigate it alone. Jenny arrived mid-morning with more neighborhood news. Word of David's affair had spread throughout their suburban community with remarkable speed, generating reactions that ranged from supportive to judgmental to merely curious. Lisa Martinez asked if you need help with yard work. Jenny reported, Susan Thompson offered to carpool Emma to soccer practice, and Mrs. Henderson from the end of the street made some comment about modern women giving up on marriage too easily. Rebecca wasn't surprised by the mixed reactions. Some neighbors would support her decision to leave a cheating husband, while others would question whether she'd tried hard enough to save her marriage. What did you tell Mrs. Henderson? I told her that David Sterling spent 8 months planning his exit strategy while lying to his wife's face, and that Rebecca showed remarkable restraint by only changing the locks instead of burning his clothes on the front lawn. Rebecca laughed despite everything. Jenny's fierce loyalty was exactly what she needed right now. There's something else, Jenny continued, her expression growing serious. I ran into David at the grocery store yesterday evening. He looked terrible, unshaven, wrinkled clothes, like he'd been sleeping in his car. Rebecca felt a flicker of concern, quickly suppressed. David's living situation was no longer her problem. Did he say anything? He asked if I thought you might reconsider the divorce if he made some grand gesture. I told him that grand gestures don't erase months of systematic deception. Rebecca nodded approvingly. Jenny understood that David's current desperation stemmed from consequences, not genuine remorse. Tyler emerged from his room looking more composed than he had since the confrontation. He'd showered and dressed in clothes that didn't look like he'd slept in them, which Rebecca took as a positive sign. Mom, I've been thinking about college applications, Tyler said. Are we still going to be able to afford the schools I wanted? The practical concerns of their new reality were beginning to surface. College tuition, medical insurance, mortgage payments. All the financial details that had been David's responsibility would now require Rebecca's attention. Margaret says the divorce settlement should protect your college fund, Rebecca assured him. We might need to adjust some expectations, but you'll still have good options. Tyler looked relieved but determined. I can get a part-time job to help with expenses. I don't want to be a financial burden. Rebecca's heart swelled with pride at her son's maturity. David's betrayal was teaching Tyler valuable lessons about responsibility and family loyalty. Emma appeared next, dressed for school despite Rebecca's offer to let her stay home again. I want to go back, Emma declared. Hiding at home makes it seem like we did something wrong. We didn't do anything wrong. Rebecca hugged her daughter fiercely. Emma was right. They had nothing to be ashamed of. David's choices had created this situation, not theirs. After the children left for school, Rebecca's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, which usually meant either a telemarketer or someone connected to the divorce proceedings. Hello, Mrs. Sterling. This is Vanessa Cole. Could we talk? Rebecca's first instinct was to hang up immediately. The last thing she wanted was a conversation with David's mistress, but curiosity won out over anger. What do you want to talk about, Vanessa? I want to apologize, and I want you to know that I never intended for things to go this far. Rebecca considered hanging up but found herself interested in this young woman's perspective. What had David told Vanessa about his marriage? How had he justified his deception? How far did you think things were going to go? Vanessa's voice was shaky, probably from crying. David told me you were already separated. He said you were just staying in the same house until after Tyler graduated. He made it sound like your marriage was over in everything but paperwork. The lie was so breathtakingly audacious that Rebecca almost admired David's creativity. He'd managed to paint himself as a victim of circumstance rather than the architect of betrayal. Did David mention the money he was moving into separate accounts or the hotel charges he was hiding from me? I don't know anything about money. David always paid for everything, but I thought that was just because he makes more than I do. Vanessa's naivete was almost painful to hear. At 28, she was old enough to recognize the signs of a married man lying about his availability, but young enough to believe a smooth-talking attorney who presented himself as a victim of an unhappy marriage. Vanessa, my husband was not separated when he started his affair with you. We were living as a married couple right up until the moment I found out about your relationship. The silence stretched long enough that Rebecca wondered if Vanessa had hung up. I feel sick, Vanessa finally whispered. I would never have gotten involved with a married man. Never. David showed me photos of you sleeping in separate bedrooms. He said you hadn't been intimate in over a year. More lies. Rebecca and David had shared a bed every night until his departure, and their physical relationship, while not passionate, had been regular and seemingly normal. He showed you photos of our private life, pictures of the guest bedroom where he claimed he was sleeping, your separate bathroom schedules, things that made it seem like you were roommates, not spouses. The violation felt even deeper than the affair itself. David had photographed their private moments, their home, their intimate life, using it as props in his deception of another woman. Vanessa, I need you to understand something. David didn't stumble into this affair. He planned it. He created an elaborate fiction about our marriage to justify his actions. You were as much a victim of his manipulation as I was. Vanessa started crying harder. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. If I had known, what would you have done differently? I never would have gone out with him the first time. I never would have let it become physical. I would have told him to work on his marriage or file for divorce before pursuing other relationships. Rebecca believed her. Vanessa sounded genuinely devastated by the revelation that she'd been deceived as thoroughly as Rebecca had been. I broke up with him, Vanessa continued. After you answered his phone, I realized how complicated his situation really was. I told him I couldn't be with someone who would lie to his wife the way he'd been lying to you. That was smart. He keeps calling me, texting me, showing up at my apartment. He says his marriage was already over, that you're being vindictive, that we shouldn't let your anger ruin what we have together. The desperation in David's pursuit of his mistress would have been pathetic if it weren't so destructive. His marriage was dissolving. His children were disgusted with him, his reputation was in tatters, and he was still chasing the woman who'd ended their affair. "What are you going to do?" Rebecca asked. "I'm looking for another job. I can't work at the same firm as David anymore. It's too uncomfortable, and people are talking. I think it would be better for everyone if I made a clean break." Rebecca felt a surprising surge of respect for Vanessa. Despite being manipulated and deceived, the young woman was taking responsibility for her role in the situation and making difficult but ethical choices. "Vanessa, can I give you some advice?" "Yes, please. Don't let David convince you that this situation is anyone's fault but his own. He created this mess through months of calculated deception. You were lied to. I was lied to. Our children were lied to. David is the only person responsible for the consequences. Thank you for saying that. I keep wondering what I could have done differently. You could have asked harder questions about his marriage. But David's a lawyer. He's trained to present convincing arguments even when they're not true. Don't blame yourself for believing someone you had no reason to distrust." After Vanessa hung up, Rebecca sat in her kitchen processing the conversation. She'd expected to hate David's mistress, to see her as a homewrecker who'd destroyed her family. Instead, she found herself feeling sympathy for another woman who'd been manipulated by David's charm and dishonesty. The phone rang again. This time it was Margaret with updates on the divorce proceedings. "David's attorney has requested a meeting to discuss settlement terms," Margaret reported. "I think they're realizing that fighting us in court would be expensive and futile. How soon could this be resolved? If David's reasonable, we could have a preliminary agreement within 2 weeks. The formal divorce decree would take longer, but the important issues like custody, support, and asset division could be settled quickly." Rebecca felt relief at the prospect of swift resolution. The sooner the legal details were finalized, the sooner she and the children could begin rebuilding their lives. "There's one more thing," Margaret said. "I've heard through professional channels that David's firm is reviewing his partnership status. Apparently his personal drama is affecting his professional reputation." The consequences continued to mount. David's carefully managed life was unraveling at every level. Personal, financial, professional, social. He'd gambled everything on his ability to manage a complex deception, and he'd lost completely. Rebecca hung up the phone feeling something she hadn't expected to feel about David's suffering indifference. She wasn't happy about his downfall, but she wasn't sorry either. He'd created his own problems through his own choices. For the first time since discovering the affair, Rebecca Sterling was focused entirely on her own future rather than her husband's failures. That felt like the most important victory of all. Margaret's office was located in a gleaming downtown building that spoke of success and sophistication. Rebecca had dressed carefully for the settlement meeting, a navy suit that projected confidence, minimal jewelry that suggested she wasn't grasping for David's assets. Hair pulled back in a style that looked professional but not severe. "Remember," Margaret advised as they walked toward the conference room, "this is about protecting your future and the children's welfare, not punishing David. Stay calm, stick to facts, and let me handle the aggressive tactics." David was already seated at the polished mahogany table with his attorney, Robert Brennan. Rebecca was shocked by her husband's appearance. In just 1 week, David had aged years. His expensive suit couldn't disguise his haggard face, bloodshot eyes, and the general air of desperation that clung to him like cheap cologne. Brennan was exactly what Rebecca had expected. Smooth, silver-haired, projecting the kind of confidence that came from representing wealthy men who'd made poor choices. He stood when Rebecca entered, offering a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." Rebecca nodded politely but said nothing. Margaret had coached her to respond minimally, letting the attorneys handle most of the discussion. Margaret spread their demands across the table with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. Rebecca would retain the family home, primary custody of both children, David's retirement accounts, and alimony that reflected her contributions to his career success over 17 years. David's face grew paler as Brennan reviewed each item. The financial reality of supporting 2 households while paying substantial alimony was clearly hitting him for the first time. "These terms are extremely aggressive," Brennan said carefully. "My client is willing to be generous, but this would leave him financially devastated." Margaret's smile was razor sharp. Your client should have considered financial devastation before he spent $50,000 of marital assets on his affair. Brennan tried a different approach. Mr. Sterling is prepared to offer joint custody, which would reduce the child support obligations significantly. Absolutely not, Rebecca said, speaking for the first time. Both attorneys looked at her in surprise. Margaret placed a restraining hand on Rebecca's arm, but Rebecca continued. David has demonstrated that his judgment regarding what's best for our family is catastrophically flawed. He will not have equal say in decisions about Tyler and Emma's welfare. David finally spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. Rebecca, they're my children too. I love them. You loved me too. David, look how that worked out. The simple statement hung in the air like a knife. David flinched as if he'd been physically struck. Brennan tried to regain control of the negotiation. Perhaps we could discuss a more equitable distribution of assets. Mr. Sterling built his practice during the marriage, and Mrs. Sterling benefited from that success. Margaret leaned forward, her expression predatory. Mrs. Sterling sacrificed her own career advancement to support Mr. Sterling's professional growth. She managed the household, raised the children, and entertained his clients while he was building the practice that he then used to finance his betrayal of their marriage. Rebecca watched David's face as Margaret systematically dismantled his attorney's arguments. For 17 years, she'd supported David's ambitions, believing they were building something together. Now she was claiming her share of what they'd built, and David looked like he was watching his life's work disappear. There's also the matter of Mr. Sterling's financial misconduct, Margaret continued, producing bank statements that documented David's secret transfers. Moving marital assets without spousal knowledge or consent could be considered fraudulent conveyance. Brennan studied the documents with growing concern. These transfers were investments, not fraud. Mr. Sterling was diversifying the family's portfolio into hotel rooms and jewelry for his mistress. David's composure finally cracked. I never bought Vanessa jewelry with our money. Margaret pulled out credit card statements showing charges at Tiffany's, cross-referenced with hotel visits. Would you like to explain these purchases, Mr. Sterling? David's face went white as he realized his attorney hadn't been fully briefed on the extent of the evidence against him. Those were for Rebecca, for her birthday. Rebecca looked at him with contempt. My birthday was 6 months ago. David, I never received any jewelry from Tiffany's. Brennan was clearly realizing that his client had been less than honest about the facts of the case. Professional attorneys hated being surprised by evidence they should have known about. I think we need a recess, Brennan said tightly. Margaret consulted her watch. 5 minutes. Rebecca and Margaret stepped into the hallway, while David and his attorney huddled in desperate conversation. Through the conference room's glass walls, Rebecca could see David gesticulating frantically, while Brennan's expression grew increasingly grim. How do you think it's going? Rebecca asked. Better than expected. David's been lying to his own attorney, which weakens their position considerably. Brennan's reputation depends on his credibility with judges. He won't appreciate being made to look foolish by a client who withheld crucial information. When they returned to the conference room, Brennan looked like a different person. His polished confidence had been replaced by barely controlled irritation. My client has clarified several factual matters that weren't previously disclosed, Brennan said icily. We're prepared to discuss more realistic settlement terms. The negotiation shifted dramatically. Instead of fighting Rebecca's demands, Brennan focused on damage control for David. How could they structure the agreement to minimize his financial ruin while giving Rebecca what she deserved? David sat silently as his attorney negotiated away his comfortable lifestyle. The house, the retirement accounts, the substantial alimony payments. Everything he'd worked for was being redistributed to the family he'd betrayed. There is one matter my client needs to address, Brennan said reluctantly. Miss Cole, the other woman, has been receiving unwanted attention from Mr. Sterling since their relationship ended. She's concerned about harassment. Rebecca looked at David with disgust. Even now, even after losing everything, he was still pursuing the woman who'd ended their affair. What kind of attention? Margaret asked. Phone calls, text messages, appearing at her workplace and residence. Ms. Cole has asked him to stop contact, but he's persistent. Jesus, David, Rebecca said. Vanessa ended things. Leave her alone. David's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. She's confused about what happened. If I could just explain what that you lied to her as thoroughly as you lied to me, that you used her as an escape route from a marriage you were too cowardly to end honestly. Margaret intervened before the discussion could escalate further. Mr. Sterling will agree to no contact provisions regarding Ms. Cole as part of this settlement. Any violation will be considered contempt of court. Brennan nodded quickly, clearly wanting to move past his client's stalking behavior. The negotiations continued for 3 hours. David gradually lost every battle, his attorney unable to defend actions that were indefensible. Rebecca maintained her composure throughout, speaking only when necessary, letting Margaret's expertise guide the process. By the end of the session, the framework of their settlement was clear. Rebecca would retain the house, primary custody, and financial security. David would have supervised visitation until he demonstrated stability, pay substantial support, and accept responsibility for the debt he'd created through his deception. I'll have formal documents prepared by end of business tomorrow, Margaret announced. Assuming both parties sign promptly, we can have this matter resolved within the week. David looked broken as he gathered his papers. 17 years of marriage were being dissolved with the efficiency of a business transaction, and he was bearing the full cost of his betrayal. Rebecca, David said quietly as they prepared to leave, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Rebecca studied her soon-to-be ex-husband's face, searching for genuine remorse beneath his desperation. What she saw was regret, not for betraying her, but for being caught, not for destroying their family, but for facing consequences. I know you're sorry, David. You're sorry your plan didn't work. You're sorry Vanessa dumped you. You're sorry everyone knows what you really are. But I don't think you're sorry for what you did to me and the children. David opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Maybe he finally understood that his words had lost all credibility. As Rebecca and Margaret left the conference room, Rebecca felt a profound sense of closure. The man who'd shared her bed for 17 years, who'd fathered her children, who'd promised to love and honor her, was now just another legal opponent whose power to hurt her was ending. How do you feel? Margaret asked in the elevator. Rebecca considered the question seriously. She felt sad for the waste of 17 years, angry at David's systematic deception, worried about Tyler and Emma's adjustment to their new reality. But underneath all of that, she felt something unexpected and liberating. I feel like myself again, she said. Margaret smiled approvingly. That's exactly how you should feel. You've reclaimed your power, your dignity, and your future. David can't take those away from you anymore. As they walked through the building's lobby, Rebecca realized she wasn't thinking about David anymore. Her mind was already moving forward, planning the renovations she wanted to make to the house, considering career opportunities she'd deferred during her marriage, imagining the kind of relationship she might want someday with someone who valued honesty. David Sterling had stolen 8 months of her life with his deception. She wouldn't give him another day. The future was hers to create, and for the first time in years, that future looked bright with possibility. 3 weeks later, Rebecca sat in her renovated kitchen, sipping coffee and reading the final divorce decree. The legal language was dry and formal, but it represented the most important victory of her life. She was officially free from David Sterling and legally protected from his financial irresponsibility. The house felt different now, lighter, cleaner, more authentically hers. She'd spent the past 2 weeks redecorating, removing traces of David's presence and creating spaces that reflected her own taste rather than their compromise aesthetic. The master bedroom had been completely transformed, painted in soft blues instead of the beige David had preferred. Tyler appeared in the doorway, dressed for school but carrying his soccer gear for afternoon practice. At 16, he'd grown an inch in the past month, as if David's departure had freed him to literally expand into the space his father had vacated. How are you feeling about everything, Mom? Tyler asked, settling at the breakfast bar with cereal. Good, really good, actually. How are you doing with all the changes? Tyler considered his response carefully. It's weird not having Dad around, but it's also kind of a relief. I didn't realize how tense things were until the tension was gone. Rebecca nodded, understanding. The past few months of David's deception had created an atmosphere of unspoken stress that had affected everyone in the family. Tyler's observation validated her decision to end the marriage rather than try to salvage it. "Your father wants to take you and Emma to dinner this weekend," Rebecca said. "Are you interested?" Tyler's expression grew complicated. "I guess Emma misses him more than I do, but I don't want to listen to him make excuses or try to blame you for what happened." David had been granted supervised visitation rights, largely at Emma's insistence. She was still struggling to reconcile her loving father with the man who'd betrayed their family. Tyler was more pragmatic, viewing David's actions as character revelation rather than aberrant behavior. "You don't have to protect me during visits with your father," Rebecca assured him. "Just focus on your own relationship with him." Emma bounced into the kitchen with the resilient energy of 13-year-olds everywhere. She'd cried for the first week after David left, then gradually adapted to their new routine with remarkable flexibility. Children were more adaptable than adults when it came to family changes. "Mom, can I paint my room purple?" Emma asked. "Since we're redecorating everything. We can look at paint samples this weekend." The ordinary conversation felt precious to Rebecca. For months, every interaction had been shadowed by David's deception and her growing suspicions. Now they could discuss paint colors and weekend plans without underlying tension. Margaret called as the children were leaving for school. "I have good news and interesting news," Margaret announced. "The good news is that David's first support payment arrived on schedule and for the full amount. The interesting news is that I heard through professional channels that he's been passed over for partnership at his firm." Rebecca felt a flicker of sympathy for David's professional setback, quickly replaced by recognition that he'd created his own problems. "How is he handling everything?" "According to his attorney, not well. He's been seeing a therapist, which is positive, but he's also been making concerning statements about wanting to reconcile. I hope you're prepared for him to escalate his efforts to win you back." Rebecca wasn't particularly worried about David's reconciliation attempts. His credibility was permanently destroyed, and she'd discovered that life without his constant deception was infinitely preferable to the marriage they'd shared. "Let him try," she said. "I'm not interested." After ending the call, Rebecca walked through her house, appreciating the peaceful silence. No more wondering where David really was when he claimed to be working late. No more pretending not to notice inconsistencies in his stories. No more accepting less than she deserved because maintaining peace seemed easier than demanding honesty. The doorbell rang at 10 a.m. Through the peephole, Rebecca saw David standing on her porch, holding flowers and wearing his most charming smile. She opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Hello, David." "Hi, you look beautiful. That color has always been perfect on you." The compliment rolled off him with practiced ease, but Rebecca heard it differently now. Instead of appreciation, she heard manipulation. Instead of love, she heard calculation. "What do you want?" David's smile faltered slightly at her cool tone. "I brought you flowers. Your favorite orchids." Rebecca looked at the expensive arrangement without reaching for it. David had always been generous with gifts when he wanted something, using material gestures to avoid emotional conversations. "Thank you, but I can't accept them." "Rebecca, please, I know I hurt you, but I've been getting help. I'm seeing Dr. Martinez twice a week, working through my issues, figuring out why I made such terrible choices." The therapy was probably court-mandated or attorney-recommended rather than genuine desire for self-improvement, but Rebecca didn't point that out. "I'm glad you're getting help. David, you need it. I want to make things right between us. I want to earn back your trust." Rebecca studied her ex-husband's face, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands. David was clearly struggling with the consequences of his actions, but she felt no inclination to rescue him from problems he'd created. "There's nothing to make right. David, our marriage is over. Focus on building a relationship with Tyler and Emma. They barely speak to me. Tyler won't even look at me during our supervised visits. That's between you and them. It's not my job to manage your relationship with our children." David's desperation was becoming more apparent. "I've ended all contact with Vanessa. I've changed jobs, moved to a smaller apartment, cut back on every expense so I can meet my support obligations. I'm doing everything you asked for. I didn't ask you to do any of those things. David, those are consequences of your choices, not requirements for reconciliation. David stepped closer, and Rebecca instinctively stepped back. She wasn't afraid of him physically, but she was wary of his emotional manipulation. What if I told you that Vanessa was never important to me, that she was just a mistake, a midlife crisis that got out of hand? I'd say you're diminishing your affair to make it seem less significant than it was, and I'd point out that you're still lying about your motivations. David looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? You didn't have a midlife crisis. David, you planned an exit strategy from our marriage for months before you even met Vanessa. The money transfers, the emotional distance, the systematic deception, all of that happened before your affair started. David's face went white as he realized Rebecca understood the full scope of his betrayal. He'd probably convinced himself that his affair was spontaneous rather than calculated. I never planned to leave you. Then why did you move $50,000 into accounts I couldn't access? David had no answer for that question because there was no innocent explanation for his financial maneuvering. I want to come home, he said finally. I want our family back together. Rebecca looked at this man who'd shared her life for 17 years and felt nothing but pity for his self-deception. This isn't your home anymore. David, you gave up that right when you chose deception over honesty. I can change. I have changed. Ask Dr. Martinez. I'm making real progress in understanding why I acted the way I did. I'm sure you are. But your progress doesn't undo the damage you caused. Tyler and Emma will never again see you as the father they thought you were. I will never again trust you with my heart or my future. Those are permanent consequences of your choices. David's carefully constructed facade finally cracked, revealing the anger beneath his pleading exterior. You're being unreasonable. Marriage requires forgiveness. You're supposed to work through difficulties, not just throw everything away the moment things get complicated. The victim mentality was astounding. David had systematically betrayed his family for months, and now he was portraying Rebecca's refusal to forgive him as a personal failing on her part. David, you didn't complicate our marriage. You destroyed it. There's a difference. What about the children? Don't they deserve to have their parents together? They deserve to have parents who model healthy relationships. Staying married to someone who lies and cheats wouldn't teach them anything positive about love or commitment. David tried one more approach. What if we went to marriage counseling? What if we worked with a professional to rebuild our relationship? I'm not interested in rebuilding a relationship with someone I can't trust. You could learn to trust me again. Rebecca shook her head. No, David, I couldn't. And more importantly, I don't want to. The truth of that statement surprised even Rebecca. She'd spent the first week after discovering David's affair, wondering if their marriage could be salvaged. Now she realized she didn't want it to be. Life without David's deception was infinitely preferable to life with his presence. David stood on her porch holding expensive flowers, looking lost and desperate. Rebecca felt no satisfaction in his suffering, but she also felt no inclination to relieve it. I should go, she said. The children will be home from school soon, and I don't want them to see you here without advance notice. Can I call you? Can we at least stay in communication about something other than legal matters? We can communicate about Tyler and Emma's welfare. That's all. Rebecca closed the door gently but firmly, leaving David standing alone on the porch with his rejected flowers. Through the window, she watched him walk slowly back to his car, his shoulders slumped with defeat. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Then she remembered the months of lies, the hotel receipts, the money transfers, the systematic betrayal of everything they'd built together. David Sterling had made his choices. Now he would live with the consequences. Rebecca returned to her coffee and her peaceful house, grateful for the silence and the absence of deception. She had work to do, children to raise and a future to build. None of that included David Sterling. For the first time in 17 years, that felt like perfect freedom. 6 months after David had walked out with his suitcases, Rebecca Sterling stood in her renovated kitchen, preparing dinner for a celebration. Tyler had been accepted to 3 excellent engineering programs. Emma had made honor roll, and Rebecca herself had received a promotion to senior vice president at Sterling Marketing. The irony of keeping her married name professionally wasn't lost on her. She'd built her career as Rebecca Sterling, and changing it would have been more disruptive than beneficial. Besides, she'd earned that success through her own efforts, regardless of the name on her business cards. Jenny Walsh arrived early with champagne and news from the neighborhood gossip network. "David's been seen around town with someone new," Jenny reported, settling at the breakfast bar that had become the unofficial community news center. A woman in her 40s, apparently. More age-appropriate than his last choice? Rebecca felt no jealousy, only mild curiosity about David's ability to find someone willing to overlook his reputation. Good for him. Maybe this time he'll be honest about his intentions. "You're remarkably generous for someone whose ex-husband is already dating." Rebecca considered Jenny's observation. 6 months ago, the thought of David with another woman would have devastated her. Now it felt irrelevant to her life. "David's dating life isn't my concern anymore. I hope he's learned something from our divorce, but even if he hasn't, that's not my problem." Tyler appeared in the kitchen, looking more mature and confident than he had during the dark days of his parents' separation. The past 6 months had been difficult for him, but he'd emerged stronger and more independent. "Mom, I got my financial aid package from state. Between the academic scholarship and your contribution, I won't need any student loans." Rebecca hugged her son proudly. Tyler's college dreams were secure despite the family upheaval, and he'd earned his success through hard work and determination. Emma bounded downstairs wearing a new dress she'd bought with her allowance money, excited about the celebration dinner. At 13, she'd adapted to their new family structure with remarkable resilience, though she still maintained a more complicated relationship with David than Tyler did. "Is Grandma coming tonight?" Emma asked. "She'll be here in an hour, and she's bringing dessert." Carol Bennett had become a much more regular presence since the divorce, offering practical support and emotional wisdom without the tension that had marked her interactions with David. Her vindicated disapproval of her former son-in-law had evolved into quiet satisfaction at Rebecca's newfound independence. As Rebecca prepared their celebration meal, she reflected on the changes in their family dynamic. Without David's presence dominating conversations and decisions, Tyler and Emma had become more expressive, more confident in their opinions, more willing to share their thoughts and feelings. The house felt different too, lighter, more authentic, filled with laughter instead of the underlying tension that had characterized their final months as a married family. Rebecca had created space for her own interests, her own aesthetic choices, her own vision of home. Margaret Hayes had been right. The divorce had been financially advantageous as well as emotionally liberating. David's support payments were substantial and reliable. The house was paid off, and Rebecca's career advancement had accelerated once she wasn't managing the emotional stress of a failing marriage. At 7 p.m., as they gathered around the dining room table, Rebecca looked at the faces surrounding her. Tyler, serious and intelligent, preparing for his engineering career. Emma, bright and social, navigating adolescence with grace. Carol, wise and supportive, offering unconditional love. Jenny, loyal and protective, providing friendship that had proven stronger than marriage. "I want to thank everyone for supporting us through a difficult transition," Rebecca said, raising her champagne glass. 6 months ago, I thought my life was falling apart. Tonight, I realize it was just beginning. Tyler raised his glass solemnly. "To Mom, for showing us what strength looks like." Emma giggled but joined the toast. "To our family, even if it's smaller now." Carol's eyes were bright with tears. "To my daughter, who finally put herself first." Jenny completed the circle. "To Rebecca Sterling, who proved that the best revenge is living well." As they drank their toast, Rebecca felt a profound sense of gratitude. David's betrayal had initially felt like the end of everything she'd worked for. Instead, it had been the beginning of a more authentic life. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She glanced at it expecting a work message, but the content made her pause. "Rebecca, this is Dr. James Mitchell from the university. Jenny Walsh suggested I contact you. I'd love to take you to coffee and discuss our mutual interest in sustainable marketing practices." Rebecca showed the message to Jenny, who tried to look innocent and failed completely. "He's the professor I mentioned who's developing that environmental marketing program." divorced, 2 teenage daughters, very kind and completely honest about his situation. Rebecca wasn't sure she was ready to date, but the idea didn't terrify her the way it would have even a month ago. She'd learned to value her independence, but that didn't mean she wanted to be alone forever. "I might be interested in coffee," Rebecca admitted. "Just coffee." "That's exactly how healthy relationships start," Carol observed approvingly. As the evening continued, Rebecca found herself thinking about the future with genuine excitement rather than anxiety. Tyler would start college in the fall, launching his own adult life. Emma was developing into a confident, capable young woman. Rebecca herself had a thriving career, financial security, and friends who genuinely supported her. David's systematic betrayal had stolen 8 months of her life, but it had also freed her from a marriage that was slowly diminishing her spirit. She'd discovered that she was stronger than she'd known, more capable than she'd believed, and worthy of treatment that honored her dignity. At 10 p.m., after everyone had left and the children had gone to bed, Rebecca sat in her favorite chair with a cup of tea, processing the day's celebrations. The house was quiet but not lonely, peaceful but not empty. Her phone rang. David's name appeared on the caller ID, probably wanting to discuss weekend plans with the children. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. "Rebecca, I know you don't want to talk to me, but I wanted you to know that I'm proud of your promotion. Tyler told me about it during our last visit. You deserve that recognition. You always were the stronger one in our marriage." Rebecca deleted the message without feeling moved by David's belated appreciation. His opinion of her success was irrelevant now. She'd built her new life without his input or approval, and she intended to continue that way. She did, however, text Dr. James Mitchell. "Coffee sounds lovely. I'm free Saturday morning." His response came quickly. "Perfect. I know a place that makes excellent coffee and has quiet corners for conversation." Rebecca smiled at his consideration for her privacy. A man who understood the value of discretion was already an improvement over her ex-husband. As she prepared for bed in the master suite she'd reclaimed and renovated, Rebecca caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She looked different than she had 6 months ago, not just because of the new haircut or the clothes that reflected her own taste rather than David's preferences. She looked confident, she looked peaceful, most importantly, she looked like herself. David Sterling had tried to reduce her to a supporting character in his story, someone who existed to facilitate his comfort and enable his ambitions. Instead, he'd freed her to become the protagonist of her own life. Rebecca Sterling was 40 years old, financially independent, professionally successful, and surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. Her children respected her strength, her mother admired her courage, her friends celebrated her victory. She'd lost a husband, but she'd found herself, and that was the most valuable trade she'd ever made. As Rebecca turned off the lights and settled into her bed, in her house, decorated according to her preferences, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete contentment with her choices and genuine excitement about her future. David Sterling had given her an unexpected gift when he'd betrayed their marriage. He'd forced her to discover that she was strong enough to build a life without him, successful enough to thrive independently, and valuable enough to demand treatment that honored her worth. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new challenges, new possibilities. Rebecca Sterling was ready for all of it. She'd spent 17 years as David Sterling's wife. Now she would spend the rest of her life as Rebecca Sterling, a woman who knew her own value and refused to settle for less than she deserved. It was going to be an extraordinary life.